Bikers harass a farmer's son. Unaware he's a Navy SEAL fresh from deployment, the small town of Oak Ridge was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody. The town thrived on agriculture, and the heart of it was the Miller family farm. John Miller, a humble and hard-working farmer, had raised his only son, Luke, with values of discipline, integrity, and resilience. Luke had left Oak Ridge at the age of 18 to join the U.S. Navy, a decision that had filled his father with both pride and worry. Over the years, he became one of the most elite warriors in the world, a Navy SEAL. After multiple deployments overseas, Luke finally came home for a well-earned break. However, the peaceful homecoming was about to take a dark turn. The arrival of the bikers, a notorious motorcycle gang called the Iron Fangs, had recently begun causing trouble in Oak Ridge. The gang, known for their ruthless intimidation tactics, had set up shop in a rundown bar on the outskirts of town. They roared through the streets on their Harleys, disturbing the quiet town with their reckless behavior. Locals knew better than to cross them, but Luke Miller wasn't just any local. On a warm evening, Luke was helping his father at the farmer's market stand in town, enjoying the simplicity of life. He had traded his combat gear for a simple flannel shirt and jeans, blending in with the everyday folk. But his sharp eyes never stopped scanning his surroundings, a habit ingrained through years of training. That's when the trouble started. A group of 5 bikers strutted toward the stand. Their leader, a burly man with a thick beard and a leather jacket covered in gang patches, sneered at Luke. His name was Roach, and he had a reputation for being merciless. "Nice little setup you got here," Roach said, picking up an apple from the stand. He took a bite and spat it onto the ground. "Too bad it ain't worth much." Luke remained calm, his hands resting at his sides, but his posture straightened slightly. His father, always the peacemaker, tried to defuse the situation. "Gentlemen, if you're looking to buy something, we'd be happy to help. But if not, I'd kindly ask you to move along." Roach chuckled and looked at his crew. "Hear that, boys? The old man thinks he can tell us what to do." Another biker, a wiry man with tattoos up his arms, stepped forward. "Or what? You gonna call the sheriff? Ain't no one gonna do nothing to us." The gang began knocking over crates of fresh produce, laughing as they crushed tomatoes under their boots. Luke exhaled slowly. He had seen real threats before, men far worse than these wannabe tough guys. He had survived firefights, covert operations, and enemy ambushes. These bikers had no idea who they were provoking. The breaking point, one of the bikers shoved Luke's father, making the old man stumble. That was the last straw. Luke's demeanor changed in an instant. He stepped forward, his piercing gaze locking onto Roach. The air around him grew heavy, and the gang instinctively felt something shift. Roach scoffed. "You got something to say, farm boy?" Luke didn't answer. Instead, he moved. With lightning speed, he grabbed Roach's wrist, twisted it, and forced the gang leader onto his knees with a pained grunt. The other bikers barely had time to react before Luke exploded into action. One punch to the gut sent the wiry biker gasping for air. A swift kick took out another's legs, sending him sprawling onto the pavement. The largest of the bikers charged, but Luke sidestepped effortlessly, using the man's own momentum to throw him face first into a wooden cart. Roach howled as Luke tightened his grip on his wrist. "Who the hell are you?" he gasped. Luke leaned in close and whispered, "Someone you should have left alone." He released Roach with a shove, making him stumble back into his gang. The bikers groaned, realizing that the farmer's boy had just dismantled them in seconds. Luke dusted off his hands and took a step forward. The gang flinched. "Pick up the mess," he ordered, his voice calm but commanding. "Apologize to my father. Then get on your bikes and never come back." The bikers hesitated for a moment, but Roach knew when he was beaten. With a scowl, he motioned for his men to comply. They picked up the fallen crates, muttered apologies, and limped back to their motorcycles. With a final glare, they revved their engines and rode off into the night. The town square, which had fallen silent during the altercation, erupted into applause. People who had watched from a distance cheered for Luke, relieved that someone had finally put the bikers in their place. Luke turned to his father, who was watching him with pride. "You've still got that fighting spirit, son." Luke chuckled. "Guess some habits don't fade." That night, word spread fast about how the farmer's boy had sent the Iron Fangs packing. The gang never returned to Oak Ridge, and the town was finally at peace. As for Luke, he went back to enjoying his quiet time on the farm, knowing that if trouble ever returned, he'd be ready. Though the Iron Fangs had left town humiliated, their leader, Roach, wasn't the type to let things go. As the gang rode out of Oak Ridge, the anger in his gut burned hotter than the engine of his Harley. "Farm boy thinks he's some kind of badass," Roach muttered, gripping his bruised wrist. "Ain't nobody makes a fool out of me and gets away with it." One of his men, a burly, scar-faced brute named Tank, spat on the ground. "We should go back and teach him a lesson. Bring the rest of the boys." Roach nodded. "Yeah, we'll be back. And this time, Farm Boy won't be so lucky." A quiet evening on the farm meanwhile. At the Miller farm, Luke enjoyed the peaceful night, sitting on the porch with his father. The stars stretched endlessly above them, and the sound of crickets filled the air. John Miller rocked in his chair and glanced at his son. "You sure handled those boys quick. You've always been a strong one, but that was something else." Luke smiled. "You taught me well, Dad, but the Navy added a few extra tricks." John chuckled. "Yeah, I can see that." He sighed. "You think they'll come back?" Luke's smile faded. "Probably. Then what do we do?" Luke sipped his coffee. "We prepare." A midnight attack around midnight. The low rumble of motorcycle engines echoed in the distance. Luke, who had been expecting them, opened his eyes from his light doze. He grabbed his boots, slipped on a tactical vest he had kept from deployment, and quietly stepped outside. The Iron Fangs rolled up the dirt path leading to the farm, their headlights cutting through the night. There were more of them now. 10, maybe 15. Roach led the pack, his eyes burning with vengeance. They stopped in front of the house. Roach revved his engine and shouted, "Get out here, farm boy. Time for round 2. Luke stepped into the dim light, his stance relaxed, but his presence commanding. He was alone, but he didn't look afraid. "You should have just left town," Luke said, his voice steady. Roach laughed. "Oh, we're leaving. But first, we're burning this place to the ground." 2 bikers pulled out baseball bats. Another cocked a shotgun. Luke's eyes narrowed. Big mistake. A Navy SEAL's response before anyone could react. Luke moved. He sprinted forward, grabbing the closest biker and twisting his arm in a painful lock. The man screamed as Luke flipped him over his shoulder, sending him crashing into the dirt. One biker swung a bat. Luke ducked, drove a fist into his ribs, and knocked him out cold. A third man raised his shotgun, but Luke was faster. He grabbed the barrel, yanked it aside, and delivered a brutal elbow strike to the man's face. Blood spattered onto the dirt as the biker crumpled. The rest of the gang hesitated. Roach, now livid, pulled a knife and lunged. But Luke sidestepped effortlessly, caught Roach's wrist, and twisted until the knife clattered to the ground. "You should have stayed away," Luke growled, before delivering a devastating punch that sent Roach sprawling. The remaining bikers, seeing their leader on the ground, panicked. They scrambled to their bikes and took off into the night, tires kicking up dust. Roach, groaning in pain, looked up at Luke. You're not just some farmer." Luke crouched beside him. "I'm a Navy SEAL." Roach's eyes widened in horror. Luke stood. "Tell your crew, Oak Ridge isn't yours to terrorize. If you come back, I won't be this nice." Roach stumbled to his feet and limped to his bike. Without another word, he sped off into the darkness. A town at peace by sunrise, word had spread about what happened at the Miller farm. The Iron Fangs had left town for good, their pride shattered, their leader broken. At the town diner, locals whispered about the quiet hero who had protected them. John Miller simply smiled as he sat across from his son. "I reckon you're going to stick around a little longer?" Luke sipped his coffee. "For a while." And for the first time in years, Oak Ridge knew peace. Days passed, and Oak Ridge slowly returned to its peaceful routine. The Iron Fangs were gone, and for the first time in years, people walked the streets without fear. The Miller farm was thriving again, with customers returning to the market stand, grateful for what Luke had done. But Luke knew better than to let his guard down. Something still lingered in the back of his mind, Roach's last expression before he rode off. There was something unfinished in his eyes, something dangerous. And Luke had learned long ago that men like Roach didn't just accept defeat. An ominous warning one evening, as Luke stacked hay bales in the barn, a pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Sheriff Dan Hudson, a rugged man in his late 50s, stepped out, tipping his hat. "Luke," the sheriff greeted. "Heard you had a little fun with those bikers." Luke smirked. "They had it coming." The sheriff nodded. "That they did. But I came to tell you something you ain't gonna like." Luke leaned against the barn wall. "Let me guess. They're coming back." The sheriff sighed. "Not just them. Roach made a call to an old friend, Wyatt Grim Callahan. Runs a bigger outfit down south. Word is, they're bringing 20, maybe 30 men. He's looking to wipe you out, Luke. John Miller stepped out of the house, worry in his eyes. What do we do? Luke looked at his father, then back at the sheriff. His voice was calm, steady. We get ready. A battle on the farm night fell, and the farm was silent. Luke had spent the last few hours preparing, setting up barriers, positioning tools that could serve as weapons, and reinforcing the house. His father, though worried, stood by his side. Sheriff Hudson, knowing the law wouldn't protect them in time, had sent a few trusted deputies to watch from a distance, just in case things went south. Then they heard it, the low, menacing growl of motorcycles in the distance. The roar grew louder as headlights appeared over the hill. A long convoy of bikes and trucks rolled onto the Miller property, their engines snarling like wild beasts. Roach was back, and beside him, a massive figure stepped out of a black truck, Wyatt Grim Callahan. Tall, scarred, and covered in tattoos, Grim had the air of a man who had seen war and thrived in it. He eyed Luke with a smirk. So, you're the farm boy who humiliated my friend here. Luke didn't flinch. That's right. Grim cracked his knuckles. I've put down tougher men than you, seal or not. Luke's expression didn't change. Then come and try. The storm breaks with a roar. The gang charged. Luke moved like a shadow. He dodged the first swing of a crowbar and countered with a devastating punch, sending the attacker crashing into the dirt. He spun, grabbed a wooden shovel, and used it like a weapon, taking down another thug. John, wielding a shotgun, fired a warning blast into the air. I ain't lettin' you burn my farm, boys. Sheriff Hudson and his deputies, stationed nearby, opened fire on the bikers' vehicles, disabling their tires. Chaos erupted as the gang realized they had walked into a trap. Luke fought like a warrior, taking down one man after another with brutal efficiency. Roach, furious and desperate, lunged at him with a knife. Luke sidestepped, grabbed Roach's wrist, and twisted, hard. The sickening crack of bone filled the air as Roach collapsed, screaming. Then came Grim. He swung hard, but Luke blocked, landing a solid knee to his ribs. The two exchanged blows in a brutal hand-to-hand fight. But Luke had something Grim didn't: military precision. A final elbow strike sent Grim to his knees. Luke grabbed him by the collar and growled, You and your boys are done here. Grim glared up at him. You think this is over? Luke leaned in. If you come back, I won't stop at just breaking bones. Grim, realizing he was outmatched, gave a small nod. Call him off. Roach, holding his broken arm, shouted at his men. We're done. Get on your bikes. Within minutes, the gang was retreating, beaten and broken. Sheriff Hudson holstered his weapon. Hell of a show, son. Luke exhaled. Let's hope they finally learned their lesson. A hero's peace days passed, and the town celebrated. The Iron Fangs were gone for good, and Oak Ridge had its peace back. As Luke sat on the porch with his father, John looked at him and smiled. You ever think about staying? Luke gazed over the fields, the home he had left so long ago. Yeah, he said, a small smile playing on his lips. I think I just might. And for the first time in years, Luke Miller was home.